Go to the cloud. And then that pretty much cues you, Leanne.
All righty.
All the rest of us will mute.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Leanne Gibbons. I'm the president of ACS, the San Diego chapter. And you're not having problems with your computer. We're having problems with the connection because our printer is coming from Santa Cruz, California, and there's a little bit of a problem with her connection. So you'll still be able to see the presentation and you'll still be able to see the pictures. And then if you have any questions at all for the presenter, put it in the ACS San Diego chat room, and then we'll be able to address them at the end of the presentation. There will not be a presentation in December, but we will start up again January 12th, and we'll have an update on the San Ignacio Lagoon in Baja California from Stephen Schwartz. And then more information about Stephen Schwartz and our future presentations, as well as our past presentations, can be found at acssandiego.org. And then if you would like to be included on our email list, also put your email in the chat room and address it to ACS San Diego. This evening, we have Jodi Frediani, who is an award-winning photographer and whale researcher. And again, she's based in Santa Cruz. She's been swimming with and photographing humpback whales on the silverback, just went to the zoo and saw the silverback gorillas, so I've got that on the brain, on the Silverbank in the Dominican Republic for the past 20 years. In addition, she's been photographing marine life in Monterey Bay for the past 11 years, and at the same time, photographing adventures in Africa, Alaska, Argentina, Antarctica, the Arctic, Brazil, Franz Josef Land, Norway, Siberia, Thailand, and Tonga. Her work has appeared in a number of national and international publications, including the BBC's Nature's Weirdest Events and Carl Safina's National Geographic blog, Ocean Views. She's also a wildlife photographer in its many forms and habitats. She's engaged in whale research via several Fluke ID projects, both here and abroad. And she's worked with co-authoring books and publications with Nancy Black and Fred Sharp, and she published her first paper in 2020, or I'm sorry, her first paper with Nancy and Fred in 2020 entitled Postmortem Attractions, Humpback Whales Investigate the Carcass of a Killer Whale, Depredated Gray Whale Calf. And then she's working with Fred on 2 additional papers about humpback whale bubble use, and has recently returned from a 3-week boat-based humpback whale field research expedition in Southeast Alaska. You can find more photography from Jodi at www.jodifrediani.com, and she presents lions, leopards, and whales, oh my, photographing marine wildlife around the globe. Take it away, Jodi.
Okay, thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation, and I hope that everyone else is looking forward to going on a little bit of a trip and be jumping around from location to location, because I've sort of organized the slides in, more about behavior and other things. So stick with me. And oh, cool. Oh, that's good. All right. So I know we talked about marine life, but I thought I would start with some terrestrial animals. These are a mother and a cub in Zambia in South Luangwa National Park, lions, and they're powerful species. They live in pride, so they live in groups. And I think that may be in part why we use the moniker lions for certain species in the ocean. And here we have a leopard, also in South Luangwa National Park in Zambia. They have spots, which seems to be a big portion of why some of the marine species get called leopards or other. But leopards are also solitary, and don't ever see prides of leopards. In fact, it took me a long time to travel in Africa before I saw any leopards whatsoever. This is interesting. And I know I didn't put elephants in the title of the talk, but we have marine elephants as well. This is a mother and a young elephant at the Friends of the Asian Elephant Orphanage outside of Chiang Mai in Thailand. And what's one of the most notable things about elephants is their trunk. So we'll see some of that happening with the marine elephants as well. And I just start by taking you on a little bit of my journey into photographing whales, because prior to my trip to swim with humpbacks on the Silver Bank, I was actually leading small groups on safari in Southern Africa. And I got into the whales because of 9/11. I had a good friend who was, she was chartering boat and taking groups of people out to swim with the humpback whales. And as a result of 9/11, nobody wanted to fly and she couldn't fill the boat. And so she made me an offer I couldn't refuse. I knew I had friends, other friends who were going out and swimming with the whales, but I couldn't justify paying for something like that while I was getting paid to take people on safari. And this is the first year that I went out for a week, and I could not justify buying a fancy housing. So I bought a $15 disposable single-use underwater film camera, and I got 2 images from it. This was one, and I entered this into an ACS national photo contest and got second place with. So that and the whales began to get me hooked. I went back the next year, and for a week, I thought, well, I have to do something better than this on this disposable camera. So I bought what I called a plastic bag housing. It was an Iwu Marine housing. And I thought, well, it'd be nice to be able to have the zoom capability. So I got one that could take a telephoto zoom lens. But when I went wide on it, I got the corrugations in the plastic housing with whale parts. And this is a pair of courting whales. And by then I was really getting addicted. So the next year I bought a decent housing and went back again. But of course, that led, one thing led to the next. If I was going to pay money for a good housing, I was going to have to go for more than 1 week. And then it turned out that I had to go for more than 1 year. And pretty soon I was going for 2, 3, 4 weeks each year. This is Jeff, a good friend now and one of our guides, and a humpback whale calf. And as we all know, humpbacks can be incredibly curious about boats, and they can be curious about people in the water. This calf had come over to get a very special view of Jeff. And in those days, he would be in front and the rest of us would be in a line behind him. And while I was in that line behind him, that calf did a move that completely passed me by, must have been down below with his mom, and came from behind and swam underneath me. And I had learned at that point that a telephoto lens is not how you photograph whales underwater. You need a wide angle lens. So this is taken with a wide angle lens. And this calf is probably not looking at me at this point so much as is looking at his own reflection in the dome port of the housing. And he proceeded to swim past me, just missing my head with his pec fin. You get a great view of the ventral pleats on the belly of the whale. And as he finished this pass, he took his flukes and he tapped my camera. I'm holding a housing, 2 hands like this, and he tapped it. And I thought, whoa, that was pretty cool, but I don't think I want to do that again. So I went down to the other end of the line. I mean, there's no place to hide in the ocean. 5 minutes later, the calf found me at the other end of the line, did the same maneuver again, and that time actually lifted the camera right out of the water, set it back down again. And I just the other night was reading a story about something that happened to Katie Payne back in the 70s in Patagonia when she was still married to Roger Payne, where she had gone out with a friend in a skiff, and they found there was an area where the current would take the whales close to shore. And so they got in that current, they got there was a right whale, and the next thing the whale spy hopped next to them and then came over, went underneath the boat, and then lifted their skiff up out of the water with its flukes about 6 inches, set it back down, and proceeded to left, and then came back and did the same thing 2 times again. So these whales can be incredibly curious, playful, gentle at the same time. So here we are down on the Silverback, and this is a female named Rooftop. You can see the speckles on her dorsal fin. There's an escort down below. This is the Silverback, I should mention, is the calving grounds, breeding and calving grounds for the North Atlantic population of humpbacks. And her calf is quite curious. And for whales to be able to see with binocular vision of both eyes, they need to do it vertically like that. So when whales are spy hopping, that's what they're doing. And this cat is taking that posture, is getting a much better look at us. And we saw this trio on Valentine's Day, and then we learned that Rooftop and her calf made it up to Nova Scotia, which was the mom's feeding grounds, and they were seen with the calf breaching on the 4th of July. This is another well-known humpback whale in the North Atlantic. Her name is Lichen. And one of the things that we learned is that we could start to differentiate them by the patterns on their pec fins. And you'll see a bit of white on her jaw. And whales that feed on the Stallwagon Bank off of Massachusetts will often feed on a small fish called the sand lance or sand eel, which will burrow in the sand hash on the bottom of the bank. And the humpbacks will go down there and they'll use their heads to scoop the fish out of the shell hash. And in doing that, they scrape the sides of their heads. Usually it's the right side, not the left. But I began to realize that a lot of our best encounters were with whales from the Stallwagon area. And there's lots of whale watching. I mean, there's a couple million people in Boston alone. You've got people coming to Provincetown. So they seem to be used to boats and used to people. This is a whale named, another well-known whale named Spoon, who, and her calf, we dubbed Lucky, because even at this tender age of a couple months, he already showed signs of some entanglement in his pec fin. And Spoon is very well known in the Cape Ann Whale Watch. They have her portrait is painted on the dock. She's part of an adopt a whale program. And she was the first whale that we were able to actually get an underwater fluke ID from. And that was important because the moms tend to be in shallow water. They don't fluke up because they're not doing deep dives very often. So we've learned to, anticipate as they start to leave. We get behind them, swim like that, and as they fluke up, we get the fluke ID photos, which has helped us, be able to know that sometimes their calves don't make it north. And so we're finding out that they have more calves sometimes than people think because nobody was paying attention on the breeding grounds. This photo is taken in Tonga. After getting addicted to swimming with humpbacks, I decided that I needed to go see how things were on Tonga. And while it's incredibly beautiful there, the Silverback is 75 miles from shore, and it's basically open ocean, but there's a shallow bank. Tonga, you're in the midst of this green archipelago. It's exquisitely beautiful. The water is very often quite clear, but for my taste, there are too many boats, too few whales, and we don't have enough time in the water to actually really observe their behavior. This is a pretty atypical coloration for South Pacific whales. It's much more like the North Pacific humpbacks, who are very dark and have dark pec fins. More typically, you see lots of white on the sides. And while this whale is typical in coloration for the South Pacific humpbacks, her behavior was not. She spent her time hanging head down in the water. And ordinarily, the calves rest beneath, the younger calves beneath mom's head, beneath her belly. In this case, the calf didn't really have that option. And I saw this whale. I went back 3 years later and I ran into the same female again with a new calf, also hanging upside down as she had before. Speaking of curious behavior, this is back out on the Silverback. And this is a female we dubbed Bianca because she had far more white on her underside than most North Atlantic humpbacks. And she showed the breast upside down in the water. And I've talked to people all over the world and nobody says they've seen a whale that do that. I mean, it was great because she glowed through the water, through the surface of the water, so we could find her easily. But she would just rest upside down. And when she needed to come up for air, she would slowly roll over, come up, take a few breaths, go back down, and then roll her upside down once more. So I don't know calf from that, whether we'll see the calf doing the same thing sometime in the future. This is another well-known whale. Her name is Canopy. She feeds on the Stellwagen, and she's very relaxed around people. And so she let us observe her calf nursing on a couple of occasions. And while I've seen calves nurse before, usually the moms are much lower in the water column and the visibility is not quite good enough. But Canopy was totally fine with us, and we got a great chance to see her calf nursing. And moms have sort of mammary teats that are inside the mammary slits, and when they're nursing, I believe the teats come out, they express milk. And this little inset here, and I apologize, it's not very good quality, but it was from a video that Scott Portelli, who's a brilliant videographer in Tonga, had taken. And that is not an odd-shaped jaw. That's actually the calf's tongue. And it's curled around, and it's got like a fluted edge, and can actually, maybe grab onto a teat, but certainly grab onto the milk as it's coming out of being expressed from the mom. So nursing tends to be an innate feeding behavior. The calves come out, they know how to do it. How they know how to find their way down to where the teats are is beyond me, but they do. But most of the feeding behavior that humpbacks do, or other whales do, is learned behavior. Now, this is a female. Her name is CA-138. She is part of the transient population that comes through Monterey Bay. This is in Monterey Bay. And that morning, she and her offspring and a male named Fat had been seen. Nancy Black had a boat of passengers, and she came back, and on the way in, she called and said, "I'm going back out. Do you want to come?" I said, "You bet." Got in my car, drove an hour down there, and we got back out, and another boat captain had managed to follow them. And she had singled out a common dolphin. And here she is, actually, we can't tell at that moment, but she's apparently stunning this poor dolphin. And the next moment, she pops out of the water, and this dolphin, and you can see the size difference there, comes flying out ahead. And you can see there's, you see these little white marks here. That's actually tooth marks, where she has had this dolphin in her mouth. She could have easily just chomped on it and killed it, but she didn't. So she stunned it again, and it spins through the air, lands in the water, and her two juveniles come over, and mom comes over, and she watches them make the kill. So this is an extraordinary opportunity to see a teaching lesson for the young of this killer whale female. This is another, I want to call it another teaching lesson. I mean, we hear about animals playing with their food sometimes, and maybe they do it for the purpose of play, but I think very often it's a matter of practicing their skills, because if you don't have the right skills, you don't eat and you don't survive. So this is a killer whale, transient killer whale in Monterey Bay with an elephant seal. And this pod took turns, just throwing this elephant seal, speaking of elephants, up into the air and over and over. And it sure looks like harassment, but I guess they get their skills down so that they can stun them and not be able to kill them, because these are much larger than that dolphin and a lot more powerful. Hello. So I just want to make sure. Whoops, that was okay. We missed one. This was another teaching situation where this killer whale family had this sea lion, which live in large groups, as we know, and they spent a lot of time diving on it, dive bombing it more or less over and over and over again. The youngsters were there. were observing the whole procedure, and then they finally moved in and made the kill. And you know, if you guys have a hard time with this stuff, there's another couple of images that are you know, of what killer whales do. And this one just happened last spring. The family was taking a gray whale calf, and it was probably one of the most difficult, most, I have to use the term brutal, kills that I've observed. And of course, you know, it's difficult sometimes to photograph this, even though it's nature, you know, absolutely raw, and the animals are just trying to feed their young. You know, these gray whales that pass by you guys on their way north, and then they have to, you know, run the gauntlet. They hug the coastline and they get to Monterey Bay. And if they follow the line through the bay, it's an additional 5 miles. If they just cut across, it's only a 25-mile course, but it's deep water, and that's where the killer whales are able to make their attack. So, you know, you lose one offspring, you know, one youngster to feed, you know, the young of a different species. Here is probably not the calf, a calf that has been killed by killer whales, and ordinarily they will eat the tongue, which is very rich, and I'm sure very tasty, and the lower jaw, and sometimes that's all they'll feed on. And then the carcass is there for sharks and other species to you know, to take part in. Times though that we've seen multiple families come, and there's nothing for the carcass by the time they're done. Birds do their best. This is a gray whale calf carcass that washed ashore, and you can see where chunks have been taken out along the edge of the flukes and the tips, even the fins up there. And there are a couple of bites up here on the peduncle, which is actually from shark before the carcass came ashore. And if in the old days we would have had grizzly bears, and we would have mountain lions, and had, you know, other terrestrial predators, you know, partaking of the carcass. Today, not so much. So killer whales all over the world. This is a North Atlantic fish-eating killer whale in Norway, although my understanding is that they believe that they also feed on mammals. And while it was snowing topside, and it was in November, and so the day was like, you know, maybe daylight was very, very short period, and it was dusk at 2 afternoon, this is not snow in the water. This is actually, these are herring fish scales. And if you look closely, you see that this animal has a little bit of a herring coming out of its mouth. So now going up to Antarctica, these are type B killer whales. And I should say, a lot of people object to the term killer whale, but the scientific name is Ursinus orca, and Orca was the Roman god of the underworld. So they've had this kind of name for a long time. And these are both type B. There's a large type B up on the left corner there. And they tend to stay in pack ice. And these are the ones that you see video of working together to create a wave to wash seals off the ice floes. The one on the lower picture there is a small type B, and they tend to feed on minke whales, and they're more often found in open water, although both of them were found on the Gerlache Strait of the Antarctic Peninsula. And they the minkies will hide under the brash ice to try and avoid the killer whales. So I threw this picture in because it was a bucket list photo for me. And you know, I've been very fortunate to do the travel I have and see animals in their environment. But this is a humpback whale feeding on krill in Antarctica. You know, lunge feeding at the surface. Last I've seen, you know, feeding beneath the surface, but you don't get to see much at that point in time. And you know, krill is a really important base of the ecosystem there. In fact, you know, krill and plankton, both phytoplankton and zooplankton, are basically the foundation of life on Earth. I have a friend who's now working on a book on how important krill to climate change. This is an Antarctic krill that is at least twice the size, if not 3 times the size of the krill we have here in California. You know, I should have stuck my hand in there for a sense of scale, but it's at least an inch, if not larger. So now moving up to, while we're on the topic of feeding, moving up to Alaska, Southeast Alaska. And we, you know are very familiar with the cooperative bubble net feeding that goes on up there. But this was a solitary humpback doing its own bubble net feeding. And I was, this was in 2015, and I was at the Five Finger Lighthouse with Fred Sharp and some others. And we had hydrophones in the water and a hydrophone on the outside of the lighthouse there. And so we could hear this whale make the feeding call. It's the same thing that's done in the group feeding, and then blow a net of bubbles. And you can see the dispersed bubble around here. And then the whale came up in the middle, but didn't do this forced lunge, in part because the amount of effort that's expended has to do with the escape behavior of the prey species. And these are just juvenile herring right by the base of the island. And it was almost like a feeding maneuver when this whale came up. And for those who are not familiar, this is a palate, not a tongue. The tongue is actually on the bottom. And then of course the baleen on the sides here. And you can see the expanded ventral pleats down on the bottom of this photo. So this was from this summer, where I was telling a few people before we got sit here that I was part of a research expedition where we were doing playback of contact calls and some other calls, feeding calls and things to the humpbacks. And this is a bubble net feeding group. And I just started flying a drone, and these whales are like a half mile, 3/4 of a mile from the boat. So I wasn't able to get there for, while they did the lunge, because they kept coming up someplace different, but just to get a sense of them dispersing after they probably dispersing for good, but, they've just fed and all the birds are looking for, for scraps of herring, and whales are going to, go down group and then come back in a slightly different location. So just hello. Let me go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is not a bubble net feeding group. This is a cooperative lunge feeding group, though, in Monterey Bay. And our whales down here haven't either, well, I shouldn't do that. There was one whale who was earlier this year actually blowing a bubble net. But so far, they haven't done that. They're feeding on anchovies down here. And there were close to a dozen whales in this group. This was back in the heyday, back 2015-16, when the blob was parked off of the coast of California with much warmer than normal water. And we had this huge influx of anchovies into the bay. And it was fantastic because you get these large groups lunge feeding on anchovy surface feeding on a regular basis. And here we have a single whale doing the same thing, creating this big spray. You can see a couple of anchovies flying through the water here to get a real sense of the fact that these very large creatures, can weigh up to 40 tons, feed on little teeny krill and very small fish. This was a whale, a really clever whale. This was back on the same period in 2015. This is on the Santa Cruz coastline, an area called Mitchell's Cove. And this is the only whale figured out that there was like a whole stash of anchovies there. And the whale would swim to the east in shallow water, make a loop turn, and then swim back to the west. In such shallow water, you could see it moving forward, pushing its pec fins in front of it, pushing the fish. And then my son was the one who said, there's a wall there because there's a sewer outfall line that goes out into the sea 2 miles. But at this point, they built this rock wall, and the whale was pushing these fish up against the wall until they had nowhere to go. And then it would lunge using its pec fins to sort of force the fish into its mouth. And there, like 100 people would sit on the cliffs because the whale would come back day after day doing the same thing. Now, talk about them eating this small prey species. Every once in a while, a bird ends up in the wrong place at the wrong moment. This, I believe it's a common murre, but this bird bird was managed to get away before the whale closed its mouth. I've seen photos taken by some of my friends and colleagues here where the pelican ends up inside the whale's mouth. And the whale goes, oops, that's what I want, and opens its mouth and lets it go. And the gullet of a humpback whale is about the size of a grapefruit. So it's not getting a bird down there, even if it wanted to. And that guy's not quite as close as he looks, but he's close. So I talked about gait behavior. This is actually krill. This is several years prior where we had lots of feeding on krill, and that tip, the upper rostrum or the upper jaw of a humpback whale, just getting ready to break through. You can see this is the lower jaw, tip of the lower jaw here. This is the upper jaw, and the krill are going, oh, let us out of here, and they're just leaping as far as they can, which is not very far. So the whales don't do these huge leaps out of the water. They come up to the surface and get it. They do side lunges often, like this blue whale. This is, again, a whale feeding on krill. And a new paper just came out that find that they feed on like 3 times as much krill as scientists thought before, and something like 10 to 22 tons of krill a day. And as a result, these whales are then pooping out a lot of nutrients into the water. So they're recycling, and those nutrients go to nourish the phytoplankton, which then nourishes the zooplankton, which then nourishes not only the whales, but all sorts of other species. And the blue whales, about twice the size of a humpback whale. So instead of 40 feet, 80 to 100 feet, but they've got these little teeny pec fins by comparison. And on the theme of krill, we've got a couple of gentoo penguins in Antarctica. So the chick is begging for krill, and on the inset there, you get a sense of how large those Antarctic krill are, because those black spots are the eyes of the krill. And you know, the parent has taken in a lot of krill, kind of compressed it into a block in the gut, and then regurgitates it and adds it to the chick. And that's a younger chick than the one we've got in the foreground here. And this is just a little bit of what I think is a swimming lesson. And it's an enthusiastic chick here. I don't think it's just trying to get across the puddle. I think it's actually practicing some of its moves, and got a long ways to go before it'll be competent out in the open ocean. Let's see if I can move forward here. Okay, so another bird you don't see really as often as the penguins in Antarctica is Wilson's storm petrel. And it's just a small bird. It feeds on small fish and fat globules and oil slicks, and they do what I call a little dance, where they just flutter above the water and dip their feet into the water to stir up whatever food is liable to be there, and then pick off bits that they feed on. This is a fork-tail storm petrel in the Monterey harbor, and ordinarily they're offshore, but this one apparently got blown in on some strong winds and was feeding on, it turns out, fat globules. And I learned from someone who saw this photo posted on Facebook that pattern on the water is the result of an oil slick. And it's in the harbor, and it turns out that this is it's not motor oil, but it's actually kitchen grease. So while that shouldn't be there, it actually fed this little fork-tail storm petrel. Pelicans, brown pelican. This is, again, a heyday of all the anchovies in the bay. And for those of you who've been out on the water, you know that pelicans usually do plunge diving. You know, they're up at a height, they see a fish, and they dive, and boom, and then they come up and they kick back and swallow the fish. Well, there were so many fish by the shore that this pelican and its friends were duck diving. They would just sit there on the water, poke their heads in and come up with a pouch full of fish. And if you look, you can see there's a fish up here at the top that thinks it's going to live for another day. It's managed to avoid getting swallowed by this pelican. That gull is ready to pick it off as soon as it hits the water. So moving on to some of the other species. This is a mola mola, or an ocean sunfish, again in Monterey Bay. And it is zeroing in on one of my favorite little species, by the wind sailor, or the Velella velella. And here's a close-up. The Velella velella is said to be a colony organism. I can't wrap my head around. It's got this blue platform. It's got a sail, and it's got the tentacles hanging down. And yet it's supposed to be a bunch of different things, organisms all put together to create this. And they mostly move at the mercy of the wind and the currents, although they can locomote a little bit, and they use their tentacles to either gather food along the way. And the mola always has an open mouth, and they feed on gelatinous creatures, and they've got sort of like cartilaginous things that aren't teeth by the mouth to sort of hook the food that they get in there. They're the largest bony fish in the world. They can get up to 1,000 pounds, though I have yet to see one that's more than 500 pounds. Hello. And here we have a leatherback turtle, also in Monterey Bay, and it's feeding, I believe, on a sea nettle. They also feed on other kinds of jellies, and these guys breed in Indonesia, and then they swim across the Pacific Ocean, and they come to our coastline here and into the bay to feed on jellies, and before they head back to Indonesia to lay their eggs. Sea otters, lovely little charismatic weasels. We've probably all heard something about the importance of them for keeping sea urchin populations in check. And this is the only time that I've actually seen a sea otter feeding on sea urchins, but we need them desperately. Unfortunately, they were mostly killed off back in the 1900s by Russian hunters who were selling the pelts to the Chinese aristocracy. But there was a small population, maybe 50 down off the Big Sur coast, and they are largely the sea otters that have now multiplied and populated the Monterey Bay area. And here's another otter feeding on, they seem to be generalists, feeding on fat innkeeper worms. Got one in its mouth, and I don't know, they have this strange cord-like thing that comes out, and two more kept in the pouch there. They're called fat innkeeper worms because other little critters populate their burrows along with them. And this sea otter managed to nab a good size abalone. And that was a story that I wasn't all that familiar with, is the demise of abalones goes back to the serious hunting of sea otters, because when the sea otters were plentiful, the abalone's behavior was different than it is now. It was just that they would hide in the crevices of rocks to avoid being picked off. I mean, these guys are really powerful to be able to pry that, abalone free. Well, once the otters were exterminated or nearly exterminated, the abalones started just hanging out on the rocks. And the fishermen saw an opportunity and said, hey, look, now we can catch all these things. And we did what we do really well, which is to overhunt them. And then happens, since the abalone will feed on kelp, is that, or on on the mosses, is that the larval form needs this very fine kelp, and that got overrun by the larger variety once the adults weren't there. And so it's been very difficult for the abalone to recover. It's they call a trophic cascade. And because this is the American Cetacean Society, you have to throw breaching humpback whales. This is off of Pacific Grove in Monterey Bay. People, living here have a great front row view. And, the question is, why do humpbacks breach? We know very little about why humpbacks do what they do, but, we believe that it's used as a form of communication, that it's a way of getting rid of parasites. A study was done that showed when calves do a lot of breaching, it increases the myoglobin in the muscle, which is like hemoglobin in the blood, which allows for, retaining oxygen, which enables them to, make the migration. And, they probably do it for fun as well. And if you look at this whale on this pec fin, all these white marks are from barnacles. And if those barnacles are all still there, it'd provide drag for the forward movement of the humpback whale. Hello, didn't ask you to go in that direction. And we like to think that they do it to entertain us, but probably not. As we talked about a bit in the previous, before we got started, is that they sometimes do that as a way of saying, I'm out of here, as a distinction from whatever they were doing previously. But humpbacks aren't the only ones to breach. This is a gray whale on the northern migration. I don't see that breaching that often up here. They seem to do more of that on the breeding calving grounds down in the lagoons off of Baja. Of course, killer whales are noted for their acrobatic behavior, particularly after they have, I missed somebody here. I'm going to go back to this. This is the first minke whale I ever saw. And this is in Stellwagen Bank off of Massachusetts. And we first saw this whale, quite a distance away. And I remember thinking, boy, that's an awfully skinny humpback. And it breached at least 30 times. And bless its heart, it came closer to us as it did breaches. And you can actually see the paddle-like pectoral fins and this white mitten, and of course the fine shape of the head. I mean, I've never seen a minke do that in Monterey Bay. In fact, can hardly even see them. You see them once and then they disappear. So minkies are miscetes with two blowholes, like in humpback whales. Killer whales are odontocetes with a single blowhole, but they both have this paddle shape. Pectoral flippers, lots of this celebratory behavior after they've made a kill. And here we have a northern right whale dolphin in Monterey Bay, and they rarely breach. They do lots of porpoising. They're incredibly fast. They're very streamlined. They live in large groups. They hang out with other dolphins. They bow ride. They're really quite lovely creatures. And but every once in a while, they come flying out of the water. And I've got two pictures here because the one in the main photo, you can see that the color pattern's an anomalous color pattern, where it's got a lot more white on its body than the normal coloration, which you see up there on the top. Risso's dolphins don't want to be left out of breaching behavior. This is a calf. The calves tend to be, are darker, and then they lighten up as they age, and then they start to get more and more scratches or sort of tattoo scarification from other members of the pod and from the squid that they eat. And squid have hooks on their tentacles. There's another Risso's calf. I put one because you can see its teeth, which is rare that you ever see one breaching with its mouth open, and they only have teeth on the bottom. They don't have teeth top. And I think that might be because they spend a lot of time feeding on squid, and so they're not chewing them so much as sucking them in and swallowing them. The teeth on the bottom help keep them from slithering back out again. I can say these things because I'm not a scientist when it comes to that, but I think that's correct. Pacific white-sided dolphin. This guy didn't get the memo about breaching, but it was actually doing a full body flip, so I thought deserved to be included in here. They can be very athletic. Sea lions, back to lions, they will play, or maybe it's a competitive situation, something. We'll often see them flying out of the water. And something that's much less commonly seen is a breaching mola mola. And this is just a few weeks ago, and this little fish breached like 5 times right next to our boat. So for anybody who's tried to photograph breaching whales, it's really tough to get that first breach. It's also true of molas. So whenever they do multiples, you're in luck. And I just threw this picture in here. This is a couple of bottlenose dolphins, and again in Monterey Bay, who came over. They were bow riding. They were riding the slipstream on the side of our boat. And they're found in a lot of different oceans as well. A friend of mine in Bermuda recently posted bottlenose dolphin. A little different behavior here, something we call kelping. This is a male killer whale in Monterey Bay who is carrying kelp on his back like that. And of course, we wonder why they do this. Just this last week, I wasn't out there, but a killer whale named Louise, transient, had killed, she and her family had killed a sea lion. Humpbacks were coming in, harassing them. And so she put the sea lion on her back in the same position here and carried it right in front of her dorsal fin. So maybe this is preparation for something like that. Here we have a Russo dolphin playing in the kelp. Sometimes I think it's just for fun. And here on the silverback, we have a female humpback whale who is playing in the sargasso weed. And this is a sensory experience because she was in a, what we call a dancer or a courting pair. And the females seem to really enjoy some kind of sensual activity at that point. They might, envelop themselves in bubbles. And this is sargasso weed, which is a bit scratchy. And here we have two mother calf pairs of gray whales along the Big Sur coast, migrating from the lagoons of Baja. They've just passed you guys down in San Diego, and now they're on their way up north. And they're going through the kelp beds, not so much, I don't think, for the spa experience of the kelp as going forward so that they can staying close to the shore and avoiding the killer whales. And the shore, the wave break, blocks their blows, the noise of their blows. They can hide through the kelp and makes it difficult for the killers to attack them there. And the day that I got that other photograph, I was talking to somebody who was up there wanting to, along Big Sur, wanting to photograph condors. And at some point we're chatting and he says, "Oh, it's another whale." And I look and I go, "Whatever is that?" And I go, "My God, it's a fin whale." And this is the only frame I had where the whole whale was in the frame because it was so long that I had no idea that I was cutting off its flukes. You get a look at the white lower right jaw and then the chevron behind the eye. It was very exciting to actually see this fin whale go by. And another rare sighting. We were actually heading towards Carmel Bay, and the captain said, "Oh, I think they're killer whales up there," because it was a little bit foggy. And we got closer and it wasn't killer whales at all. It was a competitive group, blue whales. And usually this is behavior on feeding grounds, but here they were on the feeding grounds. This whale with this cut off fluke was the female. We've got a male over here, and the primary escort, a big male, just pulled his whole head out of the water, more than I've ever seen a blue whale before. We're basically telling the other guy to bugger off. He's got this lady to himself. So breeding behavior. Back down on the Silver Bank, this is a male humpback whale who has made himself look big. He's filled his mouth with either water or air, it's probably water in this case, and brings his head out. There's a lot of posturing that goes on to look big, to intimidate the other males. Sometimes they ride one on top of another. Here is in Tonga, where we're actually able to get in the water. We don't do that on the Silver Bank because the visibility is not good enough. And if we can't see the whales, they can't see us. I went to Tonga specifically to get in the water and see whatever's going on beneath the surface. This is most likely the female up here. This is the primary escort blowing bubbles. We've got challengers coming along. It's said that the primary will blow bubbles to block the view of the female. Not doing a good job of that right now, but I think it's also just a way of establishing, his position as the primary at that point. And the other guys will try and knock him out and see who can come out with the opportunity to escort the female, since nobody's ever seen the male. And here, just a close-up of a young male humpback blowing a bubble trail underwater. So male behavior, all right? Not everybody gets to mate, and so there's got to be a lot of practice on your skills. And these are a couple of, or actually triple set of fur seals down in Antarctica. These youngsters are, I think this is Antarctica. Oh my goodness, it may actually be in up in Franz Josef Land. I apologize, people, having a momentary lapse here. But they're wrestling with one another. This is sort of juvenile behavior. It's a serious fight, but they're getting their moves down. And here we have some northern elephant seals, and you can see where that name comes from, with this great big proboscis on them. And these are a couple of juveniles, again, practicing their moves and their vocalizations. We have a southern elephant seal from the Antarctic Peninsula. This is also a male. You can't see, as the proboscis is a little bit different shape than those guys, but the vocalization seems to be just as important. And here we have back in Ano Nuevo, which is where the other northern elephant seals are photographed. That's up by Half Moon Bay, north of Santa Cruz. And this male is in an amorous mood, and the female says, "Not on your life, Betty. I've got this little guy I've got to take care of. Back off." And oftentimes what happens, not often, but it can happen, that these bulls, they crush the pups. It can happen. So she's just given him the what for. And I got incredibly lucky to be out there at when a female was giving birth and positioned in just the right way for the viewing stand there. And here is this pup coming out. It's first opportunity in the world, coming out of a watery aquatic world, and it's already got a face full of sand. And I guess you got to get used to it, since you're living in the sand for the rest of your life, in the water. There's mom, checking out her newborn, and we've got the pup, a little while later. It's actually got sand on the rest of its body, seems to have cleaned its muzzle off, and it's trying to figure out where it is now and what comes next. So moms and their offspring is a female sea otter with her pup. The pup's got a great cushion and great bed, floating bed. Mom takes care of him. And we know this is a female, not only because she's got a pup on her chest, but because her nose is pink. And what happens is the males, when they're mating, they grab onto the nose. And I have made a point of that I'm not coming back. I'm not incarnating as a female sea otter. Sometimes, I've seen a few where the nose is almost bitten off. So it doesn't look like a lot of fun. Maybe I'm missing out on something. Polar bears. To have a polar bear in here. This is taken in Franz Josef Land, which is in the high Arctic, the Russian archipelago, Russian Arkhangelsk, I can't pronounce that, Oblast. And was very exciting to see my first polar bear. These guys feed on stills, but they isolate to do that. If they can't, they will feed on duck eggs. And I think that's what this polar bear was doing. You can see just a little bit of yellow on its lower jaw. I forgot to use the napkin. And sometimes they'll feed on moss, and they may even feed on whales and walrus carcasses. Speaking of walruses, we've got some walruses up in Franz Josef Land where they're recovering because they were hunted for their blubber, for their skins, their meat, and even for their tusks. And I read recently that the polar bears will, I was going to say, it's sort of terrible to say this, but it made me immediately think of that horrible concert that just happened in Houston, where there was a crush of people and a number of people died. Well, polar bears will sometimes rush walruses to create a stampede and then feed on the ones that get crushed in the stampede. So here we have a couple of Weddell seals. We're back in Antarctica. We've got Weddell seals down there, crab eater seals, leopard seals. And these guys feed on a variety of fish and other species. The crab eaters, even though they're called crab eaters, are actually krill eaters. And then we have the wonderful leopard seals, one of my favorites. And these guys are powerful predators, you know, a bit like the leopards. They tend to be solitary. They're great hunters. And here we have one doing its best imitation of a rock in the water. And these are juvenile gentoo penguins who haven't learned yet about all the hazards of the sea. And they make good, easy pickings for the leopard seal. Leopards have, not only they're powerful, they've got their spots, they've got these great teeth, and here they feed in the same way that our California sea lions do. They can't use a knife and a fork, so they grab onto their larger prey species and they kind of throw them through the air and rip out pieces. And yeah, kind of tough on the penguins, but it's good feeding for the leopard seals. Leopard sharks. This is taken by New Brighton in the Santa Cruz, Aptos area. There used to be lots of them in Corn Slough, and they will feed on various species in the sand area. We've got it's not a leopard shark because we just had a leopard shark, but this is a whale shark. And I'm guessing that they called that because they feed on plankton as the Mississippi whales do. And the largest one ever recorded was 41 feet, which is the same size as a humpback whale. So I had the opportunity to swim with them off of La Paz. And here is doesn't look very white, but it's a white shark juvenile in Aptos in the Monterey Bay, where over recent years has developed a nursery because it's a really warm, sheltered area. And moving on to some of the lesser species, we have sea nettle jelly. This is from Monterey Harbor. And we've got a striped jelly, which somebody must have been thinking of beauty at the time that this was created. Not that the other species aren't, but it's quite a ordinary looking animal. And hello. This is a Spanish shawl nudibranch. It's photographed in a tray or a bucket that somebody else found, because I'm not good at spotting these guys, but really beautiful, although they can be cannibals. And this is another nudibranch who's escaping me at the moment. This is in the harbor, and a friend actually spotted this. Back to my favorite, the Valala, or the we call it the By the Wind Sailor. This is a slow one on a very flat, calm day, carrying little jewels of water droplets on its platform. And this I photographed in a bucket on a boat. The deckhand had pulled up these Valalas to show to everybody. Every so many years, we get just this flood of them in the bay, and you get a real chance to see different sizes of the age class of these different villas. And that yellow fringe on them is actually an algae. That's kind of a mutualistic relationship where the algae, I forget exactly how it worked. Anyways, they work well with the Valala. They feed each other, and you can see the little tentacles on these youngsters. Krill. This is our krill in the Pacific Ocean. I managed to photograph this just looking down off the boat when it was just the surface of the water was just covered with these guys, much smaller than the Antarctic krill, but they feed, the blue whales almost exclusively. They feed humpbacks, feed species, a whole lot of sea nettle jellies, probably too many, and we get these blooms from time to time. We need more turtles to help keep them in check. These are the pelagic red crabs, otherwise known as squat lobsters, probably from down in the San Diego area. But when the blob moved up and it got really warm, they hung out. This is in the harbor itself, and you'd see them like floods of them up on the beaches. Anchovies. Photographed this off the Capitola Wharf back in like around 2015, where there were so many anchovies, the birds got full, and then they had to hang out on the beach. These are pelicans, white pelicans, because their guts only so large, and then they would go again. And I saw even gulls just standing there waiting for the anchovies to flop up on the beach before they pick them off. This is one of the unfortunate things that happened, where the Santa Cruz Yacht Harbor is a long, narrow lagoon, and it used to have a sandbar across its mouth in the wintertime. And, now it's dredged, so it can stay open for all the boats to come in and go, and all the anchovies came in. And even though they put oxygenators in the main channel to keep them from dying, that helped in the main channel, but off on all the side areas where the boats were, is like thousands of anchovies died, and they used every means possible to take them out of the water because they start to decay. They destroy the paint on the boats. I would love to say, anybody know what this is? Once you talk to me, I'll just tell you. And I put this in here because of the patterns. This is the attachment side of the baleen, the blue whale. And this is a blue whale that was a ship strike victim, showed up in, carcass came to rest in Bean Hollow State Beach, north of the Santa Cruz area. But that's the part that actually attaches to the mouth. And just a few photos here, almost done, for those who are falling asleep, of human interactions with marine species. This was a Netflix crew in Monterey, and they're all hard at work looking in the wrong direction, except for Jason back here, who's got his camera trained on this male killer whale. He just thought he'd make a quick pass. This was a picture I showed you earlier of with the baby and the gray whale calf. This was from that same hunt. People, again, not quite looking, although they're aware that they've got a whale behind them because the guy's taking a selfie. This mom and son seemed to be a bit clueless that they had whales behind them. They were kayaking out there. This is just off of Moss Landing when the whales were coming really close to shore. The Dominican Republic, we've got fishermen offering their fish to us, which we don't usually buy because this is out on the reef and it's so seriously overfished, not from these guys, but from previous use of dynamite and other things in the coral reef system. Here's another Dominican fisherman on shore where he just walked into the water and nabbed this octopus with his hand. Back in Monterey Bay, this is a giant octopus, or maybe an Architeuthis robustus, I'm not sure, and a deckhand looking for the beak to show to the passengers. We pulled this out of the water. It may have been brought up from the deep by a Risso's dolphin or somehow some other way. And we've got Ari Friedlander, wonderful humpback whale researcher, actually more than humpback whales, but whale researcher, shooting biopsy darts, humpback whales in Antarctica with a National Geographic film crew, taking, recording the work that he was doing down there. Necri team. This is California Academy of Sciences, Marine Mammal Center folks. This is up in Half Moon Bay. This is a juvenile humpback that was probably a ship strike victim that had come and rested ashore right by Highway 1. So drew a crowd. And here you can see the thickness of the blubber on this young whale, thickness of the skin, and get a sense of the effort that it takes to actually do a necropsy to find out what the cause of death was. A friend of mine down off La Paz photographing this very unique blue jelly. I apologize, I don't have any idea what species it is. Another young woman swimming with a whale shark. My Jeff, one of our guides on the Silver Bank, and he put his camera down to enjoy playing with this humpback whale calf. You can see mom and then the escort down below. And my friend Jean, who is our other guide and runs the trips that I go on out there. And this is a courting pair, except that instead of a male and female, it was two males. We figured they were probably juveniles working on their moves. And Jean thought he would see if he could entice this humpback, which he did. Its buddy left, and the two was an interspecies dance for a short while. And that's it for this evening. I apologize, I wasn't able to include all of the species I've seen, but I hope this gives you an idea. And thank you to, Cheeseman's Ecology Safaris, who have gone to Antarctic and Franz Josef Land with, Conscious Breath Adventures out on the Silver Bank, Monterey Bay Whale Watch in Monterey, and Whales Underwater in Tonga.
Thank you very much, Jodi. And if anybody has any questions, we invite you to put them in the chat room so we have some organization. I think Jodi would stay on and answer some questions. So I have amazing photos, all right, from Maryland. And then Alexa wants to know, can you talk a bit about the projects you have recently or are currently working on?
I don't know if that's photographic projects per se or research, but I'll say I just working with folks actually through the SETI, which is the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute, doing the research that we were doing in Alaska. I'm part of that research team in part because of my hands-on experience with humpback whales and experience in the breeding calving grounds, which nobody else on the team has. I've also working on a project trying to get it published as a book called Wild Monterey Bay, which we have a website. If you Google that, you can find it. We also have a Facebook page, and we've interviewed about 40 different people, including boat captains and researchers and fishermen and just regular folks and artists and filmmakers of their most memorable wildlife encounter in Monterey Bay. There's some really, really interesting stories there. Also working on a scientific paper with Fred Sharp on humpback whales blowing bubbles, and that's not bubble nets, that's bubble rings like smoke rings. And it doesn't happen very often. If anybody's seen that, let me know. But we had a whale that did that in the 80s on the Side Bank. Apparently 2 humpback whales have done that recently in Hawaii, off of Maui.
Our national president, Uko Goiter, tuned in tonight from Seattle, and he said, exquisite, stunning, and mesmerizing photos, Jodi. Will you ever contemplate publishing a book? And I think you just touched on that. Kim wants to know, is December a good time to go whale watching in San Diego? Every day is a good day to go whale watching in San Diego. Carlo says, is there a species of whale that is on your bucket list to photograph?
I would love to photograph belugas. I would love to photograph any species that I haven't seen yet, narwhals, right whales, but at the moment I don't have any plan to go see them. So there's always something new to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And have you visited the humpbacks in Maui? George, one of our board members, says he's planning a trip in February and be interested in any kind of insight you might have.
I have been to Maui and actually got started. I went there to swim with dolphins, and this was must have been at least 20 years ago. And I was out on the boat, and the captain said, I think I see a humpback whale. And I just got goosebumps, which I'm getting about right now. And we didn't see one, but I decided that I needed to do that. It kind of got me going in that direction. So no, I've got friends who go to Maui every season because the breeding season for the North Pacific humpbacks is the same as the North Atlantic humpbacks. I'm usually in the Dominican Republic at that time and not Hawaii, although I might have the opportunity to spend a couple of weeks in Hawaii this coming season. So I might see you there.
Yeah, very exciting. I'm planning on being there in February myself.
Awesome.
Thank you for sharing your photos. This is Annie. Thank you for sharing your photos. How many species of whales are there in Monterey?
I would have to count them up because I'm not good at numbers and remembering things. We have humpback whales, we see blue whales, we see gray whales, we see fin whales, we sometimes see minkies, we see transient orcas. If we're counting dolphins, you've got Pacific whitesides, we've northern whales, we've got common dolphins, we got Whistler's dolphins, we're up to 10. We have Dall's porpoise, we have harbor porpoise. I might be getting sorry, but that's at least 12 different cetacean species that we see in the bay.
Pretty impressive list. And here's a
Yeah.
person that didn't get it, somehow sent it to me directly, but hi, Jodi, love the presentation and photos. I was on a trip when you, Jeff, and Jean ran upstairs to catch the green flash twice. Can't remember if it was on the Silver Bank or on the Bahama spotted dolphin trip. I moved to San Diego 4 years ago from Marin. Great to see you. ACS is an amazing organization. We're reconnecting people. So that was from Jill Whitebook.
Okay, well, great. No, that was on the Silver Bank. And it's funny that you brought that up because I was just thinking about that earlier today. We have a different boat now and we can't do the same thing. And that was something that was just so much fun that Jeff started running, because if you're running up or down, but you can see it goes down and then you go up and you see it go down, the sun go down again, and then you can see it.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to throw it back to Leanne to close this out. And everybody, this will be up on the ACS San Diego website on our YouTube channel. It usually takes me a couple of days to process it out of Zoom, but I will get it up there ASAP. Leanne.
I'll just say thank you to everyone. Thank you very much, Jodi. That was incredible. I'm envious of all the traveling you get to do and all that you get to see. And so thank you very much.
Well, you're quite welcome, and thank you so much for inviting me, and come to Monterey and make that your goal. We'll see you up here.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right.
We'll see you all in January, everybody. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good night. Thank you, Jodi.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night.
Bye.
Hey, Jodi, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Great. One quick question. You know, the
Yes.
filming on the bay, by the way, my name's Terry and I swim out in the bay. So I think it was 2 summers ago, I first saw a film crew doing a lot of filming. And then recently I've seen, you know, this other film crew. I'm wondering if they're connected, because I was told that Netflix would have something like December 20th or 22nd of 2020 when I spoke to the people on the first film crew, you know, a couple of summers ago. Do you any clue what? I'd like to see what they're creating.
I don't know much. I mean, I have a friend who was filming on that crew, but I know that in this last February, or no, it was last May, I think it was. And I know that Netflix was out for a month, but I know that there are a lot of film crews. I mean, we had Big Blue Live that, you know, was BBC
Right.
came and, you know, did a whole series. And then there are other crews that come, you know, time and again.